Thank you. Welcome to this meeting of the Children and Families Advisory Panel. This meeting is being held remotely and members are in attendance via video conferencing. The meeting is being live streamed and will also be available for repeated viewing. I will begin by naming the members who are in attendance for the public record and asking members to confirm their attendance. During the meeting, if a member wishes to speak, they will indicate this to me by raising their hand and I will call them to speak in turn. All agenda items are for noting today, and I'll ask members to verbally indicate their agreement at the end of each item. I would like to remind members that the County Council standing orders continue to apply. Please keep your microphone muted unless you've been called to speak, and that you may be visible on, remember that you may be visible on screen to the public and other members even when you're not speaking. I will now call those members in attendance, please. Members, please unmute and confirm your attendance for the record and to ensure that you can be heard. Councillor Anne Briggs.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Zilla Brooks.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Frank Carpenter.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Edgar.
Present, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Powell Hare.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you, Powell. Councillor Jackie Porter.
Present.
Thank you, Jackie. And Councillor Malcolm Wade.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Right. Apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Mitchell and from Councillor Boyles. Councillor Brooks is attending today as a deputy member. Declarations of interest. Does any member have any disclosable pecuniary interest or personal interest in any items on the agenda today? I hear none. Councillor Stallard.
I just wanted to record my presence. Thank you, Chairman.
I had noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Councillor Stallard. Confirm the minutes. I've got a date here of just simply April 2020. Is that the correct date for the minutes, or should there be an actual day? Please, Emma.
Apologies, Chairman, that's minutes from the 4th of February 2020.
It's the 4th of February 20. Right, I've got it now. Yeah, I thought it was the 4th 2020. Okay. Members, could you please confirm the minutes as advised in the pack?
Agreed.
Are you all agreed?
Agreed.
They're a correct record of the meeting. Thank you. Deputations, there are no deputations today. Chairman's announcements, I have no chairman's announcements. So we go straight into item 6, page 9, which is the annual fostering report. And this is going to be introduced by Sarah Smith. Thank you, Sarah.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm just going to take you through the annual fostering report, which is the activity data for 2019 to 2020 in the fostering service. I've gone up to June 2020. That was the latest data we had at the time of the report writing. So I'll just take you through some of the highlights. By all means, stop and ask me if I've crossed over something that you wish me to talk about. But I'll move into page 10. So it talks about point 7. There were 483 registered foster carers in Hampshire at the end of June 2020. That was following our recruitment of 31 fostering households last year. We have a fostering service marketing strategy for 2020-2021 with a target to recruit 34 fostering households. I've covered the information about each of the teams, which I wouldn't go over, but I'm happy to answer questions if needed. I'll come down to point 16, which is on page 11. This talks about our increase in social media presence and platforms that we're using to recruit our foster carers. We've really invested in our social media over the last year, which has been really successful. We've got our number of inquiries, number of initial home visits, number of assessments, numbers of approval and conversion rate. What you'll notice is that the conversion rate is quite low. It's not, that is in line with the national picture. I know for people outside of fostering, it does seem a very low conversion rate, but it is quite the norm. Just an update on today, really. I just had to look, and our conversion rate for this year is 10%, which is really good so far. Our target is 8 to 10, so it's going quite well so far this year. I'll move on down to the bottom of page 11, so it's point 20. This is annual fostering survey results, and you'll be able to see some of the data that we collected last year from our annual survey. We've got the survey that we've completed this year, which is just about to be reported on, so we'll hopefully see an increase in foster carer satisfaction this year. All of this data was used in planning what we're going to do for this next year and used within the Modernising Placement Programme work, with a real focus on ensuring that foster carers feel valued and satisfied with the support they are provided with from the service. And obviously you can see at the bottom of point 20, you can see some of the targets for the next 5 years in terms of foster carer satisfaction. Point 21, we had our first foster carers get together last year. So this is the first social event that we've facilitated for foster carers. It was a real success. Foster carers gave lots of positive feedback about it. They generally meet in support groups or training environments. So to come together just for a social event was really positive. We had some managers from the service there as well, which they really liked, and being able to meet them in a different atmosphere. We are going to continue that as an annual event. Obviously, COVID has disrupted our plans this year because they do like to get together, although we're hoping to run a virtual event of some kind. We move on to the Connected Carers team, so point 22. In 2019, our Connected Carers team, the assessing social workers, moved into the district team, so into our children's teams, to be co-located with the teams that are making the referrals for family and friends foster carers to be assessed. The idea behind that was to really increase that joint working and the early identification of those people that might be able to look after children from their own family if they need to come into care. So that's really been really positive in terms of building up those relationships and sharing knowledge around fostering. We are still working, you'll see point 24, which is the top of page 13. There still remains quite a target to get some information from social workers at the right time to complete those assessments. That's some work that we're continuing with this year and is a focus for us. And we've just completed or just worked on a pre-screening tool, which will help with that. So that's about to be implemented, the updated version to be implemented, which asks the social worker for some analysis prior to that coming for assessment. So that will really help get those sections 4 and 5 completed of the assessment within a really early time period. The next section from point 25 is about our fostering panels. So it just goes over how many fostering panels we have every month. So we have 6 fostering panels every month. Each panel will hear a maximum of 5 cases. During our lockdown and COVID, we've moved that to virtual panels, which in the main has been very successful. I think fostering panel members will tell you that they prefer a face-to-face approach, but actually we are able to get the information that we need and we are still able to make recommendations. So that's been really positive. We have some statistics starting at point 29, so that's the bottom of page 13, and that's around the household numbers. So as I said, there were 483 registered foster carers at the end of June, and this just breaks down county carers, connected carers, that's our friends and family, specialist respite care, so they're the carers that provide specialist respite breaks for disabled children, and stay and put carers. So these are carers that are caring for over 18s as a stay and put placement once they've turned 18. We move on to how many foster carers we have on hold at any one time. These are for personal reasons. They're doing something that they need to be having taken a break from fostering for a period of time. As you can see, the numbers relatively stay the same. We did have one period where we had quite a low number of carers on hold, but generally they stay within the 20s. So that's quite usual for us to have about 20%. So timeliness of household reviews is coming down for point 30. You can see that we are currently at 89% compliance. We had a dip in Q4, as you can see, but we've come back up and are compliant at 89%. Timescales for supervision visits, 94% of foster carers have received supervision visit within timescales. So that's every 6 weeks we visit our foster carers. Of course, at the moment, that's mainly virtually, although we've moved back to face-to-face visits for a lot of our foster carers in recent weeks. Timeliness of unannounced visits. So all foster carers are required to have an unannounced visit annually. So that's at 89% of our foster carers have had an unannounced visit in the last year. Foster carer medicals, we have to have repeat medicals every 3 years for our foster carers. We are 78% compliance in this area. It has been a big challenge, especially in recent months, obviously, to get GP appointments to be able to complete those medicals. We have got some self-declaration forms, which the regulations allowed us to use for a period of time, but we are trying to get most of our foster carers to try and get back to their GPs, even if it's for virtual appointments, that we can really have a look and make sure their medicals are reviewed. DBS checks we come on to, so we are 88% compliant in most all our foster carers having a 3-yearly check on their DBS. You'll see point 36, there will always be a small number of overdue DBSs because you cannot apply for a DBS until somebody's turned 18, yet as soon as they're 18, the DBS is then overdue. So any child that turns 18 within the household, we will always have a small number that are going to be overdue. I'll come down to deregistrations. That's under point 40 at the bottom, near the bottom of page 16. You can see the numbers of carers that have deregistered in the between 2019 and 2020. There were 80 fostering households that deregistered. More positively, 49 of those were connected carers and 39 of those were for positive reasons. So the child might have moved home or been adopted, or the carers took on an SGO, so less intrusion from children's services at that point. So they're really positive reasons for 39 of those households. 31 county carers deregistered, so that's our usual stranger carers. And I'll just look at the reasons for most of them. Change of circumstances is always a top reason, and usually it's things like, as I said there, wanting to spend more time with the family, change of employment, change of own family circumstances, and family caring commitments. We did have 3 foster carers that left last year because they were dissatisfied with the department. 2 of those felt they had a lack of placements. I've looked into both of those cases. One of the fostering households was only able to care for babies, which is very limiting in terms of the children that require our care. And the third of the foster carer was a specialist respite carer who had a dissatisfaction with having to chase payments. We are aware of that issue. We're working on a payment work stream at the moment, and we're just trialling this month. So this week it started. We are trialling a self-claim form so they can use online, so they can go in and make their claim self-service. So we're hoping that will be a real positive for our foster carers. We've got a 4-week trial that started this week, and if it's positive, we'll be rolling that out to the rest of the service. We also started last year completing exit interviews for our foster carers in the same way that we would for staff. We think it's really important to find out deeper reasons, although I see a report on why they wish to leave. Well, that was to get through to the really deep reasons of why that is and try to make service improvements. Sections 45 takes you down to the complaints and allegations of foster carers in the last year. Of note, 114 foster carers continue to foster after a complaint or allegation, and we didn't have any cases that went to the independent review mechanisms. That's the appeal process. We didn't have any last year that went to there. Point 49 is the Modernising Placement Programme overview. We have started to work with foster carers on how they wish to be supported, and really it's focused on recruitment and retention of foster carers and equipping them with the skills that they might need to care for some of our more complex children. And you'll see that I've outlined kind of some of the thinking at this time. Point 51, that's just an overview of our Hampshire Fostering Network. Our relationship with Hampshire Fostering Network has generally been positive. It continues to be. I meet with them every month, which has been a really positive operational meeting. We also attend their committee meetings as well. So we've managed to continue that in COVID time, so having those all virtually, but they are really positive meetings where foster carers can raise any concerns or issues they've got and find out any information, and I can also do the same from the service. So then we moved on to the conclusions. I think I've covered probably most of the conclusions when I've gone through the report. Point 54, there were some new training packages delivered last year, and we're just reviewing the training pathway again now to have a look at what we might need for the future, and foster carers are involved in that. And I'm just moving on. The other thing I didn't talk about, sorry, during the report is point 57. So we have a new initiative last year, Foster Focus Week, which is held towards the end of October. That's just a Hampshire initiative, a Hampshire campaign that we wanted to refocus to recruit foster carers. We've got a national fostering fortnight in earlier on in the year, so we wanted something later end of the year to really focus that. So that will be in the next couple of weeks, and we've started our campaign material on our social media about that. And then I won't talk you through all the priorities, but as you can see from the bottom of page 19 through to page 20 are our priorities for the coming year and our targets. So I'll open up if there's any questions from anybody, or have I skimmed past anything that you would like me to discuss further?
I will kick off the questions. I've got Councillor Carpenter in a minute. Legal training on item 23. Could you explain what the legal training format would take, please?
I'm just going to go back to the point. Oh, so this was a workshop that from our legal team, ran this workshop for us this was specifically around connected carers. So those social workers that assess our family and friends carers, the reports that the courts are wanting probably look slightly different to some of the regular fostering reports in terms of the detail that they want. So we had one training course run by our legal team to help our social workers understand the expectations that would be from the court, so that we had less challenge at court because we prepared for it and the report already told the court everything they needed to know. So that was a workshop that was held. I mean, that one was face to face, obviously, but they're going to continue, and legal work with we've got an assistant team manager in the connected carers team, and they facilitate that training course.
Okay, Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you very much for the presentation as well, and the notes. I was just looking at your table 10 about concerns, complaints and allegations, and obviously there were 114 or so, more than that, people involved in concerns, complaints or allegations, which is quite a high number of all the foster families that we had. Obviously only a few of them actually left or had to leave or give up. I just wonder what sort of support do we give to the families who go through that, because that must be a very worrying thing, and how do we manage to persuade them to stay?
Yeah, so we do have independent support that we provide to all of our foster carers undergoing a complaint or allegation. Most foster carers, we also got our complaints policy as well, so they know the policy, they know what we're going to follow. I will say most foster carers really understand the need to investigate these concerns, complaints and allegations, and they generally work very well with us to help us kind of resolve those issues. So they have their independent support, which we refer them to. That's from a agency separate to us. We've also, in the recent weeks, we've just given them a Foster Talk membership. So that's the agency we use as Foster Talk. And that will then provide them with legal advice as well, which is something new we haven't done before. That gives them a bit of extra support during that time. From the fostering service, during that time, we will visit and speak to them weekly to make sure they're kept up to date. And we just try to resolve those issues as quickly as possible, so the impact is the least as possible where it doesn't need to be.
Chairman, I wonder if I might just add to that. It's important context. Many of the children that are in care, their parents don't want them to be in care. So, of course, they will make complaints about foster carers. They will say the child hasn't been fed or whatever. And we have a duty, of course, to investigate all of those. But very often they are, shall we say, in that context of parents being unhappy that their children have been taken into care.
And I think you can see that with the majority of the foster carers that continued fostering. It's because we've obviously assessed it, we investigated the concerns, and we have felt that that's reasonable conclusion to make, that children are going to be safe in their care.
So that kind of intervention by the real parents is something that's almost expected to happen.
Yeah, and I think foster carers are quite aware of that. We talk to them a lot during training about the prospect of a complaint or allegation. Either from the child or from the parents, because obviously children are very influenced by parents as well. So it will often be the child that will make the allegations, but sometimes it's because children actually would prefer to be at home, and they think by making an allegation that's going to get them home. So, but yeah, like the numbers, the 114 that continued fostering, just I think evidences that we felt that those were foster carers that could continue to offer safe care to our children.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Porter, please.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions really, and thank you for the very clear presentation. It's nice to see it being reported at a pace, having assumed we've read it, which is great. The continuing care, the connected carers assessment, I noticed that about 25% are connected carers, and so it is a bit concerning that you state that it's difficult to achieve consistency of assessment. So that's just the first thing I'd like to raise. The second one is 31 in and 31 out sounds okay, but did they have different skills that you have to assess? And are you looking for specific skills in new foster carers that would replace the 31 that went out? The third question is about DBS. I'm concerned about actually only having 88% actually agreed. I appreciate the 18-year-olds, but you did also talk about the signing up against the tracking system. I have to say you're not the only ones. Every single charity involved with children seems to have the same problem. It's quite a short window, isn't it, when you can actually sign up? So is there anything we can do about that at a national level to try and do anything about it? And fourthly, I'd just like to say I really like your idea of the hive carers. I think that most families have someone else they can turn to, and a young child can turn to. I really like that, the idea of that service. So thank you.
Okay, so I'll come to the first question. Our connected carers. So I think the point you were making was around consistency with our new structure. Is that yeah? So we know our new structures have some challenges. Obviously, we've had it as a central role before. It's been one manager signing off the assessment, so that consistency. What we've done from this change that we had there in terms of the restructure is the assistant team manager that sits into my structure, who kind of gives the fostering expert advice to the managers that are supervising those workers. She's been bringing them together every quarter as a sort of a peer support and a training, and obviously we had the legal training. That's our efforts to make that a bit more consistent. What we've also done is we've started to bring some children in care representatives and cast workers into fostering panels. So they've just started in the last month, I think it was, that we had a couple start to be present on fostering panels. It's really important for them to see what fostering panels are going to look for within their assessment, because I think that's really, it really helps them to understand what kind of information is going to be needed. So we're really working on consistency. I would say it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is something we're aware of and are working on.
Excellent, thank you.
Your second,
the 31 in, 31 out sounds simplistic, but I'm sure it's not quite as easy as it sounds.
It's a real challenge. Obviously, we didn't, our targets last year were higher and we didn't meet them. It was a really difficult year for many authorities, having spoken to a number especially in the south. That's just where my management groups are. So it wasn't out of context with the national picture. However, it isn't what we need in terms of our numbers. So the Modernise and Placement Programme was specifically tasked to look at that and to try and make sure that we find ways to increase the number of foster carers we have, but also to make sure the foster carers that we do get on board have the skills to look after the children that need the care. So some of those that come in wouldn't have been brand new carers either. They would have been transfers in from other authorities and agencies. So it would have been a mixture there that we had.
So not starting from a standing start.
Some of them would have been, some of them would have come with significant experience. It's really difficult. We always look for people that have had some care experience, not just children. I think we used to advertise it as just children or market it in that way. But actually what we've realised is a lot of people that care for adults and things have those skills as well. So we are always looking for people who have care experience. That's one of our marketing lines.
And then the next one was about DBS. Have we thought about asking government about changing this a bit? Because it's about a 10-day window. It's a really short window, isn't it? To actually
it's a really short window, and I think I'll let Stuart or Kieran talk about the challenge in the government. But what I will say is, prior to lockdown, we were really moving forward with this, with all our social workers having hybrids, that we would only send the link to the foster carer just before we were about to visit, because then we could support them to do it, and then we were starting to get within that window. Obviously, COVID has really derailed that because we're not with them, and obviously talking them over virtually is much harder. Obviously, we're now starting to increase our visits again, so that will be the plan moving forward, that we'll continue to try and only send them the link just before we're about to go and visit.
Right, okay. Congratulations on the hive thing. That's really good. Thank you.
Just a comment, if I may, around government with the pandemic and Brexit. I suspect that DBS may be slightly lower down the list, but it's a fair point, and I will take it back to my regional colleagues when I meet with them to see what their views are, whether we can collectively write a letter.
Because once you've done it, you've lost the chance, haven't you? You have to start all over again, effectively. And I mean, I've been a victim of that through trustees of things, so I do appreciate It seems too tight for the job. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Sarah, thank you for the report. It's really good. The question that I want to ask, actually, it's about the foster carers themselves. They play a pivotal role in looking after children. And it's the fact that they don't feel so professionally valued. And it's good to see you've got a plan to improve it. But what are the issues that it's going to take 5 years to get to 75% of them feeling professionally valued when they are such a key role in the process of looking after children?
I think there was an appreciation of culture change takes a long time, and it takes a long time that even though you make changes, for that to really feel to foster carers that they can see the evidence of those changes. So I think it was just kind of to show how long that might take, but that doesn't stop our efforts. And actually the work that we're doing in the Modernising Placement programme, foster carers have been involved at every step, and we're using their views, we're consulting with them all the time. They've been really involved in the Hive thought process and how that might work practically. So I'm hopeful that we might see bigger changes sooner, but I'm also conscious that actually it does take time to build that culture change.
Sorry, I get that, and I think it's really good what you do. I'm trying to understand what the problem was what the problem is in the first place.
Perhaps I'll answer that, if I may. I think the way our service is structured, you have a county service that delivers the service right across, and then you have district teams, and there is a disconnect between the two. And Sarah manages a county service, so support to foster carers right across Hampshire, but social workers for the children are coming from an entirely different part of the service. They're coming from the district teams, and there is a gap there, and I think we've increasingly recognised that and thought we need to do something about it. Dare I say it, when I was a social worker 100 years ago, I used to know the foster carers that I was working with, but children are placed all over Hampshire now, and so we've lost some of that. Interestingly though, 70% of the children are within 20 miles of their home. So we haven't lost it entirely, and I think we need to sort of re-galvanise ourselves and double our efforts around creating those local relationships again.
Thank you.
And just to add, we had started that just before COVID hit. So the district teams were having sort of coffee mornings and stuff that foster carers were coming along to, so they could meet social workers outside of their usual kind of relationship, which was really positive. And obviously we've had to change the way we work in recent months, so it will be something we'll continue to look at.
Thank you.
Councillor Hare.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Sarah. That was a really comprehensive report. We've just said social care workers and foster carers offer a brilliant service, and it's quite a demanding role. What sort of mental health support do we offer social workers and foster carers?
In terms of specific mental health support, I think it's more about the support we provide them. So it's more of emotional support is what we offer at them at the moment. So they have their own social worker who visits them at least every 6 weeks or contacts them at least every 6 weeks. We've introduced placement stability workers to the service. So when things are a bit tough and they need more intensive support, and that can be their emotional support as well, they'll come in for a period of 6 to 12 weeks. And our fostering community is very strong in Hampshire. They do a lot to support each other. For social workers, we have got children's services. They've got obviously the employee helpline that they can contact, and obviously they've got their relationships with their managers as well. I don't know if Stuart or Karen want to add anything about specific mental health support there.
I mean, we deal with things on an individual basis with foster carers and with our social workers. So as and when they need extra support, then we put that in. Our workforce is our greatest asset. We know that. Whether we're foster carers, who we don't employ, of course, but they're still a key part of our service. We'll put individual support in as necessary. I think it would be fair to say that the demands on those supporting social workers and foster carers over the last 6 months has been extensive, actually. And I know that managers have gone out of their way to speak to people more regularly, speak to them late in the evenings, keep touch with them, make sure they're okay. It's part of what a good manager does when they recognise that they're sort of well-being issues. And I think I'd use the word well-being rather than the mental health, just from my perspective as to what I see. So the support's there, but it's hard work for those managers making sure they're always available and always able to give that support.
Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Sarah. Are we still running the buddy scheme? And also, are care leavers still coming in on training days? Because foster carers have always found the care leavers very helpful. And my third one, please, is how many complaints do you get now on social workers being changed from the foster carers? Because that seems to be a big complaint at panels.
Sorry, can you just go back to your first point? Because I wrote down the second two.
The first one was the buddy scheme. Are we still doing that?
Okay, so the buddy scheme, yes, we still do the buddy scheme. We've actually sort of reintroduced it a bit earlier now. So as soon as they come to us and want to be assessed, we're getting foster carers to go out then. We've just introduced a coffee and chat morning. So at a point where foster carers haven't yet, or potential foster carers haven't made an application yet, but they just want to speak to a foster carer rather than a social worker, we've set up coffee and chat mornings so they can come and just talk to a foster carer. That kind of starts a buddy relationship really early on, because if we can, we will use the same person as their buddy. That will go right through. So yes, we've still got the buddy system, and that still works well. Sometimes what we find is foster carers will create their own network a little bit, so they prefer to have somebody different, and that's absolutely fine. We'll go with whatever works for that particular foster care or applicant. Moving on to care leavers. So care leavers, we've struggled with training a little bit just because of the commitments that care leavers have got. It's really difficult for them to then commit to those other things. We have just had a few care leavers. We invited them to apply to be on fostering panels, so we've had a few applications, so I'll be sort of talking to those care leavers very soon. Again, it's difficult with commitments, but we really want to make it work, so we're going to try and be as flexible as possible. So that it might be that they don't regularly sit on a fostering panel, but they may sit on some, or they may introduce some some questions for panel members to ask on their behalf. So we're really looking at how they can get involved, even if their commitments with work or higher education or anything don't allow them to be fully committed. So it's definitely something we want to keep working on. It has got its challenges. In terms of complaints about changing a social worker, I haven't got actual numbers on me. I can absolutely find out, but I haven't really heard of many in sort of the last 12 months really. So it's very few and far between. We've got a fairly stable workforce in fostering. There are some changes, obviously. Generally what we have, if we've had quite a few maternity leaves in the last 12 months, so people going for periods of time and coming back again, which obviously can't be helped. But actual changes in social work isn't that often in fostering. So I'm quite confident that there'll be very few complaints about that.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. Thank you, Sarah.
Councillor Hare, did you have an additional question?
Sorry, no, I just forgot to lower my hand. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Well, I see no more. So we come to the recommendation, which is on page 9. And the recommendation is to note the report. Could I have verbal agreement, please, members? Are you agreed?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. We'll move on, therefore, to thank you very much, by the way, for that presentation, Sarah. And we move on to item 7, which is the Hampshire Youth Offending Team update. And Nikki Shavito, is that how you spell your name, Nikki? You pronounce it? Nikki Shavito will present this item.
So it's Nikki Shave.
Nikki Shave? That's
right, yes.
Oh, you're not going to believe this. The TO, which it says it's Nikki Shave to present.
That's got to be a new one.
You suddenly got a sort of Italian name there. Okay, thank you, Nikki.
Okay, thank you. I understand that you've kind of read the reports. First point I just really wanted to make was that when I've appeared before you in the past, I've been asked to present our annual Youth Justice Board plan. However, the first point to make is that this wasn't a requirement of the Youth Justice Board this year, because what they wanted was our COVID-19 continuity and recovery plans instead, which were kind of duly submitted on time, which then released our grant. So There is no formal youth justice plan here, but I think I have hopefully enough to tell you other than that. So looking at paragraphs 3 onward, which is the contextual information, a lot of this I think we've presented before. The first paragraph gives the context around the yacht being a partnership, and that partnership is set up in legislation under the Crime and Disorder Act from 1998, and that there are a number of other agencies in that partnership. So ourselves, the police, local authority, health departments, and also probation are the kind of key players kind of that are kind of involved in the management of the yacht. And we also continue to be managed under Hampshire Youth Offending Team Management Board, which is chaired by Stuart as the Assistant Director of Children's Services. As previously stated, just a brief mention that we work with both children on a statutory and a non-statutory basis. And our statutory work includes anything that comes from the courts or anything that comes from our out-of-court disposal process, which includes youth cautions and youth conditional cautions. Our non-statutory work actually links to the work that we undertake under youth crime prevention. It's a scheme that's been kind of run for a number of years now, particularly from the youth offending team, which in other local authorities is sometimes managed through early help, but we feel this is the right and proper place for us, and that's something that is kind of well embedded into our service. One of the changes this year is that we saw 2 of our specific YCP workers being embedded with the youth, so with the Willow team, to work specifically with young people who are at risk of exploitation through county lines and so forth. And that was externally funded by Hampshire's Violence Reduction Unit, which I think I've presented a report on before to you. We have paragraph 6 looks at our team structure, which remains to be the same. So 4 geographical teams and a specialist service team, and those teams. So those teams are kind of managed by on a geographical basis, working with specialist services. Scrolling down. At any one time, I think I previously reported that our caseload is consistently around about 500 children. And that did remain consistent since the last time I came to you to speak. And in February 2020, just before lockdown, there were actually 489 children there. That actually changed over lockdown because we had no access the courts were closed. We didn't see any children kind of being referred to courts, and our YCP numbers were down as well. So by June of that year, our numbers were actually down to around about 246. So that's a kind of marked reduction in numbers as a direct result of COVID. One of the things that happened in the last year was that the youth offending team and also other youth offending teams were required to undertake a self-assessment against the 2019 National Standards for Youth Justice. And I've just put in the in paragraph 8 the nature of those sort of 5 standards. So they are actually worded like I've written them. They do sometimes to the visual eye as actually being kind of quite short and brief, but that's actually what the standards are. So there's the 5 standards. So we undertook 2 levels of self-assessment. The first related to the strategic self-assessment, which was about how our management board was cited and had assurances against performance in those areas. And that's kind of really important, because what it looks like is that when you look into the blue box summary of how we assessed ourselves as requiring improvement, but that isn't about that we require improvement in our work in those areas, but more so how the board is cited on the activity in those settings. And we've been doing some work there to try and kind of address that. You will see in that particular chart that we assessed ourselves from good to requires improvement across the 5 standards in a strategic, but the operational self-assessment, which looked at around about 130 cases across that, in some of the areas we assessed ourselves as outstanding. This self-assessment is in the process of being validated, and through October and November there's a validation team which are looking at a number of yachts to see whether those judgments are kind of are true and based on kind of robust robust criteria and how they managed it. Moving on, paragraph 9 looks at so although I mentioned we don't need to have a youth justice plan, we do need to have a plan about the sorts of things that were important to us and which we need to kind of work on. And paragraph 9 details the kind of areas which are our priorities for this coming year. And this is based on any kind of gaps in our strategic assessment or our national standards assessment, and anything that we know it's going to get us from where we are to be considered an outstanding service in our next inspection. So the things that we need to kind of look at is to develop how we improve the participation of children, parents and carers and harmed people, albeit the victims that we work with, in the work of yachts, and how we provide assurances to the board. The second is around how we understand, children, the key points of transition in children's lives and support them through these stages. My view would be that we've always been traditionally very good at cases where that transition is very obvious. So from when a young person becomes an adult, from custody into the community, at the kind of the end of orders. But what we're less good on is the more subtle kind of changes that children have in their lives, and kind of being much more aware that we've got those transition points in plan and managed and planned for adequately. One of the areas that we do know that we need to do in Hampshire is to improve the way that we that we record. We know that probably about 70% of our staff do it brilliantly, but there's another 30% who don't. And also develop the plans, the way that we actually work with plans with children and parents. All this work is kind of regularly and ongoing. We want to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of, when I say both yachts, that's both Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Youth Offending teams. Looking to how we develop the relationship between the 2 yachts to be much more kind of aligned. Already we have a lot of joint policies and joint kind of ways and policies and processes. We want to develop a more trauma-informed approach, and that's kind of in common with other kind of our partnerships, health, for example, and our police all have that as kind of an objective sort of going forward. And we want to further develop our out-of-court delivery service to divert more children to becoming first-time entrants. But we also want to be aware of the disproportionality that might exist for children who come from our black and Asian minority ethnic groups, particularly to see how they are not disadvantaged. Paragraph 10 onwards deals with our finance, which is fairly kind of standard from last year. Not much has changed. Our Youth Justice Board grant remained the same last year. Our local authority grant for children, so we had a slight reduction, which we planned for, and we continue to receive payment in kind from colleagues in the National Probation Service, the clinical conditioning groups and the police. They contribute through staffing into the service. And also we also received money as detailed in paragraph 11 from our partners in the Office of Police Crime Commissioner, who give us a grant of around about 200,000 to support youth crime prevention programmes. Moving forward, we also in paragraph 12 detailed that the money that we previously had around the finance staff, the 2 therapeutic wellbeing officers, did end in March 2020. We had enough and sufficient underspend to be able to continue that service for another year, but that is due to go at the end of March 2021. We're actively looking to see if we can find some alternative funding to support that. So financial situation always remains a challenge, not least because of our funding is some short term, and we have been required to save some 150,000 from the Children's Service budget next year. And when we are on course to identifying that. We've already identified 50, but we are planning to look at 150,000 next year. That's mainly going to be achieved through the fact that we have kept a number of vacancies unfilled, and actually we have assessed that those posts are no longer needed. Moving on, just finally, the section on performance, which details where we sit in terms of relationship to our national indicators. We have three. The first, it relates to first-time entrants, which we are higher than our comparator groups and still need to do some work to try and kind of lower that. Our reoffending rate is quite positive. It's at 34.5% on the last time that was kind of measured. So that was good and positive. And we do actively try and keep our number of young children out of custody. And at the current moment, I think in the last 12 months, it's been reduced to, I said 23 in the report, but since the latest figures has reduced to 16. And finally, just to the final sections relate to the consultation, any consultation that we have, and that there may be some of that subject to those savings that I've previously mentioned. However, nothing's kind of been identified yet. I just really wanted to close on just a final piece of good news, is that the Isle of Wight Youth Offending Team was part of the national inspection programme to look at how yachts responded to COVID-19. Whilst it was the Isle of Wight team, the approach from the Isle of Wight was exactly the same as the approach that we took for Hampshire. So any kind of positives that we received into the way that we manage the Isle of Wight can also be applied to Hampshire. And so I just concluded by a quote there that actually was directly attributed to both yachts on the way that we actually adapted to that, which I think is a really positive kind of for our staff going forward. I'm going to close now if there's any kind of further questions.
Just for a little bit of clarification, on page 26, item 9, it refers to BAME children, B-A-M-E. What is BAME children, please?
Apologies for using that. It's children who come from Black and any other minority ethnic groups, so anyone who's actually not non-white British in terms of the classification. We know that there is some disproportionality throughout the criminal justice system, and we are challenged to actually make sure that we are assured that actually that doesn't happen in our service.
Thank you. Councillor Briggs, you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I do. Nikki, can you tell me, please, this year during lockdown, we've had lots of problems in the parks with youngsters, 15, 16, 17-year-olds smoking what they shouldn't, taking what they shouldn't, and then wrecking the park, and the police are called. And if they're sent to the YOT, how do you engage with them? What do you do?
So that's quite a broad question, and I could answer that quite detailed, so I'll try and be succinct. I think the first thing I would say is us being aware of those children in the first place. So a lot of those children, we would be encouraging anyone who became aware of that to refer it to our youth crime prevention programme, because we wouldn't want to first thing criminalise children unnecessarily, and it might be that there's some preventative work to be done. So, for example, if that referral takes place, there will be allocated a specific worker, and that worker will be trusted to try and engage with both the children and their families, their networks, and understand kind of what the pressures are. And in kind of engaging and then undertaking kind of an assessment, we'll have a clearer idea about what might be driving that behaviour. At the same time, being aware of, balancing kind of what we think is behaviour that does need an intervention versus the behaviour that perhaps doesn't need kind of that. And because what we do know is that there is significant impact on outcomes for children if we get involved when it's not appropriate for us to do so. So we would need to kind of be very sure that we're not making a situation any worse. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that we are working with those young people. So it's things about, you know, looking at perhaps a reparation response. For example, is there any way that, you know, there's any reparation that could be done? We would do that by linking at anyone that's impacted on. But also the other thing that we do is we link into our community safety partnerships as well. So there was an incident, I think, recently that came around some schools in Basingstoke, for example, and so the yacht manager then sought to engage with the community safety partnership in order to kind of look to see how we could get a solution. So it will be about an individual, it will be about a partnership response. But I did really want to say as well that actually what we do need to be guided about is not to involve with children unnecessarily, because labelling children as perhaps, you know, children who are offenders can be really detrimental to their long-term outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
If that's answered your question. Come back to me if not.
Can I just ask you one more, a very quick one? When we have to take children, young people into custody, where do they get sent now? Because we don't use Swanwick Lodge, do we?
No. So from a custodial's perspective, any child that goes there will be assessed for vulnerability, and there's kind of three levels of custody. So we have secure children's homes, which are for the younger children. We have secure training centres and youth offending institutes. So our current secure training centre is Oak Hill, which is the one that we're predominantly children from Hampshire go to, and our YOIs could either be Feltham or Cookham Woods.
Thank you very much, Nikki, for your clear answers. Thank you.
Councillor Porter.
Thank you very much. I probably have to declare I'm the chairman of the Winchester Community Safety Partnership. I think I probably ought to mention that at this point. Just to say thank you very much, very clear. I just want to ask three questions. Really, it talks about managing vacancies in the paper, but you have a probation officer vacancy. What's the impact of that, and is that one that you would be filling anyway? I'm hoping that's going to be answered yes. The other one is the impact of reduction of numbers that you have seen that change. Are you expecting that to rise again? It's quite a dramatic change, isn't it? And actually could affect your funding, I suspect, if it stays that low, but it's perhaps not typical. Paragraph 9 describes the links with youth services and actually the BAME community. And in fact, I was talking about that with the district commander only recently, about the change in relationship by explaining what the process is to all children, but particularly to BAME. And in fact, I had a personal experience of something not dissimilar with young white children when I said, "Are you okay, guys?" as they're jumping into the water, and they assumed you're going to tell them off. So that's an example. I mean, but I think that work is there, and I wondered how the police are rolling that out. And then the last one was really about inroads into reoffending, and you mentioned about transition areas, transition times. I presume that's in relation to their relationships with family as well. And I just wanted to know if you did find particular points at which reoffending was more likely to happen.
That's a nice question, that last one. I think I'll do, if I just take them one by one. So the first one was around probation complement. So this is now subject to a national agreement based on kind of workloads and so forth. And it's something that we don't, I'm afraid, have any kind of local control over. So currently we have our complement, Hampshire's complement, is two 0.5 probation officers. And the reason why they're 0.5 is, perhaps I should mention, is because what they want is that the other 0.5 actually means that when that child transitions to adult, their worker doesn't change. So the probation officer holds the pace in that 17, 18 and will continue to hold when they transition. So that kind of is there. So it's a national agreement. I'm currently negotiating with both the local delivery unit head for the National Probation Service around that other 0.5 PSO. What we're looking to do is to maybe kind of merge with our colleague yachts to see if we can kind of get more for our money, if for want of a better. So actually looking to see if we can use that in a way that kind of benefits that, because we do have a small resource attached to the cities and the Isle of Wight, for example, that we can then perhaps put together and have a bit more of an impact. So those are discussions on that first point. So in terms of the impact in relation to numbers, we do know, we are able to predict that there is a significant backlog going in courts. Right. So in terms of our courts coming forward to December, we know actually, and these are just young children we know about, they're not the ones that perhaps we don't know yet, if you know what I mean, who have been released under investigation, and so on and so forth. So we do know that our statutory work will continue. Our triage, which is the process by which we get our out of court disposal work, so our cautions, we do know that that's been increasing. So, for example, I think last week they had something like 12 young people they were agreed to. So we think that that's fine. YCP is our prevention one, which is perhaps more impacted on because we have schools, for example, and we do get a lot of referrals to schools. We're looking to see how we can maximise that and use that a lot more creatively. For example, working with like our colleagues in residential services in order to try and kind of maximise that. I'm just going to look at your other questions. The transition one. So we're looking at a very broad kind of view of transition, and it's something that is perhaps something we've not really thought about anymore. It's previously, so we thought about the obvious areas, and we were very good at that. But so things like if a child is, for example, on a child protection plan, becomes a child need plan, changes from education providers, for example, when they reach 16, and kind of so on and so forth. But the question around, which I thought was really interesting, is I don't have the answer to, is about what are the reoffending rates around transition. That's a lot of food for thought, I think, that I can take away, because I don't think we particularly thought about it in that way. We do know something. We do know that actually most children offend in those first month of supervision, or the first 3 months, and secondly. So the longer we work with them, the more chance we've got, if you know what I mean. So if we've had some success in the early days, that's likely to be sustained, but nothing particularly around that last point. And point 3, I'm not sure if I
just mentioned about there was about the police and their approach of, well, it's not exactly, well, it is stop and search, I suppose, in many ways. Yeah. It's the attitude to BAME, and whether there's any, I know there's some work going on in Winchester. I wonder if it's across the whole district.
Yeah, I think kind of so we work closely with our colleagues in police. What we've been focusing on is that next step, really. So being kind of mindful around when our joint decision-making panel is making decisions of the potential for bias. So I've had some discussions with our workforce development to see what kind of training input could be done for both us and our police colleagues to sit on that process, to see if we can kind of measure that. I do know that there's a lot of discussion that we're having with, particularly stop and search, and I think I was party to some email from the new AC on looking at about making that interaction meaningful, so that when you do engage with the public, that is meaningful. I don't have any further information.
Not only that, he talked to me about using youth organisations to sort of work on that from the child's point of view as well.
Yeah,
and I thought it was really a very practical thing that we could do within the youth teams around the place. I know they're not Hampshire ones, but nevertheless working with them, with the OPCC.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we so one of our objectives is to improve our participation of our young people across all of those, and having conversations with them about, you know, for example, you know, what's it actually like to be, what's your experience, you know, how are you adjusting to that? So, for example, anecdotally, there was a case where one young person from a different culture was saying, I'm not going to wear a face mask on a train because that's just an invitation, for example. So there's a whole lot of discussions around, you know, what that was about, really, and unpicking that, and with obviously the objective to comply. So yes, absolutely. It's all work in progress, I think, is the way I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. And Nikki, again, it's a good report. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is around performance, because I know you're looking to improve the figures and the stats and that. But and you say at point, I think it's 19, the action plan, the half use offending works on a basis of continuous improvement, which is good, and you're preparing for the next inspection. Well, hopefully the continuous improvement is to improve the service, not just to pass the inspection. What things are you planning to do going forward that you haven't, if you could say that, identified in the report? That's question one. What's the next step of improvement? And question two, it's not about reoffending per se. Do we have data on how many young people end up in the criminal justice system as adult criminals? Yeah, I understand reoffending when they're young and how we get them out of it, but how many of them are we not able to divert from the path of a more long-term criminal behaviour?
Okay, so take the first one. What's the next steps to be outstanding? Yeah. I think what we would say is that actually the inspection and the quality standards are based on good outcomes for children. So when we talk about doing well in inspection, it really is a kind of kite mark on, I think, in terms of the of a service's performance. So, for example, one of the things that inspectors don't do so much is worry about the data. They're more interested in the quality of the delivery. So putting that. Yeah. So our next steps to kind of try and get there is around. I think it's about developing the leadership of my service. So, you know, it's not, I can only do so much to influence my managers. My managers then work with the team. So I think leadership is one of the best things. Consistency comes with leadership as well, in terms of looking on that. We have a good idea about what we need to do in terms of practice, where our areas for development are. So participation is kind of one of that, how we use the participation of children. Another big one is planning. And since I wrote the report, we've just actually delivered a whole new half-day workshop to our whole staff in improving kind of planning and the way that we work with children. We've also got a kind of robust quality assurance system now in place to kind of, which actually directly reflects our inspection criteria. So they kind of now mirror what the inspectors will do. And alongside that, we build in sort of extra things like, for example, improvement in the quality of recording, and so on and so forth. So I think it's about knowing what you need to do. That would be my first question. Okay, thank you. The second question, and my background is from adults, so I know from what we've done, what I can actually do to start staff in that position, and there is a lot of looking at kind of first-time entrants from an adult perspective. So we do get a lot of there is still a lot of first-time entrants that happen post-18. That kind of be the first time moment. So we do know that, you know, we can have first-time entrants up to even kind of 50, 60-year-olds you've seen in the past due to change that. So that would be the first thing to say. We also, the other thing that we do know is that there are only a small number of children that we do transition across. So by the time that they are still working with us at 18 or may offend at 17, I'm in 18, and the numbers are quite small in terms of transition. The group I think that perhaps we know least about is the ones that kind of have been on our service, who then kind of complete and then may commit another offence post 18, and that's the group perhaps where we know kind of less about. in terms of that. One of the discussions that we were having kind of on an earlier meeting this morning is how we try and kind of get some of that 18-year-old data and look to see how that kind of can inform what we do in terms of, so what is the reoffending rates there? It's not, are you happy with that answer? Would you like me to? Have I rambled a bit?
No, you gave me an answer as best you can, because what we haven't see, we need database decisions, and I suspect, because I have some understanding about that the data is collected on this, that it's not easy to get, and also it's not really looked at that often. But the key element is we must break the chain for so many of these youngsters that grow into professional criminals, if I may use the term, and we want to stop that. And if we've got them on our radar when they're young, and we can break this chain, and a lot of it is, it's quite complex, not just due to their criminal thoughts, it's to families and relatives, and friends that have been in the system. We can break that chain. That will make us a significant difference. And I think, if anything, to me, that's one of the next steps, is to get that data and use that data to move effectively. Is that you see I'm coming from?
Yeah, so I think what we're looking at is more long-term studies or more long-term data. So what we do at the moment, we take a cohort at any one kind of year, and we track that cohort for 12 months and add a bit. So by the time we know what that reoffending rate of that cohort is, we can't influence that original cohort, but what we can do is influence, or we may be able to, because they may still be kind of known to us, but what we can do is use the learning to influence the current cohort, if you see what I mean. But if we then had a study, for example, that actually looked at kind of the cohort of 16, 17-year-olds and then measured them, I don't know, sort of 5 years' time, that might be more the what we need to do. I don't know any studies that do that unless they're very specific. Offence types, for example. But
I just think that's a not a gap in the service, perhaps it is, but it's something that we need to look at to make greater improvement.
Yeah. Overall.
Thank you.
Nikki, a quick question from me. In paragraph 13, you refer to £200,000 savings you've got to make. And one of the ways you're going to do this is by not recruiting. Now, as I understand it, you're all short-staffed in any case. Is this not going to make things worse?
No, well, so what we have a number of vacancies across kind of the area that we've held that we don't need. And I would say that kind of, I know that sounds, but I'll give you an example. So we've got a vacancy currently in our performance unit. And that person's job was to do with data quality. We know that now that, and I said to the manager, why haven't we recruited today? She said, well, I don't need it. And the reason why we don't need it was because we've improved our data quality. So in a way, that's just one example. Due to technology, we used to have two different grades of admin. We'd have admin officers and admin assistants. We don't really need admin assistants anymore. Because of the way that we are working all sort of virtually, so that's another kind of saving that we've had in terms of impact. We streamlined some of our services, so for example, making it much more kind of targeted around our youth crime prevention. So we at one point, cases were left perhaps not being open for long periods. We now kind of have very kind of more focused interventions. We've taken out some of the things like our asset assessment is really time consuming, so it takes 2 days. We've made a decision in perhaps our lower risk young children. They don't need that degree of an assessment, so there's more savings there. So that's where we've made the savings, which then have that impact of less staff. So I'm really confident. I mean, some of these vacancies we've held for way over a year, and we've not felt the benefit of not having them.
Thank you. Councillor Porter, have you got another question?
Yes, I have. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a question. I realise we've been talking about the children. What are the educational outcomes of these young people? And is there any influence you can have? And what's the gender basis of the children?
Our gender basis does fluctuate from quarter to quarter, and we do track that. So at the moment, I would imagine it's probably, and this is kind of because I say it does fluctuate. Is around about, I think in COVID it reduced actually to be much more boys than girls. Around 10%, I would suggest, or it can fluctuate. And one of the things that we're certainly kind of doing, and which we've just had a discussion around, is having a more robust response to girls, for example, on that. And sorry, the first question?
Just do you track the educational outcomes?
Oh yeah, the educational outcomes. We have a specific ETE team who work predominantly with maybe the 16 to 18-year-olds. We track them individually. So, for example, every assessment that we have as a closing summary where progress is being kind of measured in terms of on an individual, but that's very much a qualitative process. So we haven't been able to draw that quantitative kind of data. We had a discussion this morning actually in the board about how we can best use our education kind of data in much more effective way, and see what reports that we can write to kind of draw that out. So we do it on an individual basis, but we don't do it in a way that we can actually harvest that data to present in any form.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, can I just thank Nikki for her presentation? The recommendation by the panel is to note the report. Could I have a verbal agreement on this, please?
All agreed. Agreed.
Thank you. Many thanks, Nikki. Thank you. We move on now to item 8, which is Children and Families Branch managing the service through the pandemic. Stuart, you're going to present this, I believe. Stuart Ashton.
I am, Chairman. Thank you. And apologies, members. As I was sat here beforehand, I don't like to apologise often because I don't want to let members down in any way, but many of you have seen this presentation in one form or another, either via select committee or in other committees. I like to recycle presentations because it's efficient. But so I will go through this at pace. We'll make up some time, and I'll just talk a little bit about, I'll look ahead and think about, so what does this mean for the Children and Families Branch as we move into the autumn and winter? So my apologies for those that have seen this perhaps for the third time. So if you move to slide 3, which is titled Our Approach Over the Last Few Months, you'll see and you'll remember that we took a 3-phased approach as we entered lockdown, each phase being based on having less staff as we move forward. We always stayed in phase 1, which is business as usual, but doing it differently. And interestingly, as we've moved out of lockdown into the general restrictions, we have more or less maintained business as usual, but doing it differently. And I'll return to that towards the end. What did that mean? Well, that meant that we kept all of our statutory timescales. Social workers undertook visits if they needed to, and they couldn't do it virtually. They used PPE. All of our meetings went ahead, but we expected professionals to dial into those meetings via Teams. What I would say is attendance at meetings was really, really good, because actually the police, for example, could attend all of the child protection conferences. GPs had the ability to attend for a short while in a conference. So that's been really beneficial. But the important thing was it allowed all of the normal activity to keep children safe to continue unchanged in that sense. If we move on to the next slide, maintaining management grip. It was something that I was particularly keen on. I know through many years of working with the service and many offset inspections, actually, if you have the right management support, and don't make apology for using the word grip, that actually creates the right conditions for social workers to be able to practice safely. And it was important that that didn't change because we were in lockdown and not necessarily based in our offices every day. And I think the service responded really well to that. Managers, in fact, if anything, had more contact with their staff, that social workers were going out, either doing a face-to-face visit or doing a virtual visit, and then coming back to their manager and talking it through, because it was a different experience. And so that worked very well. At a senior leadership team, I had daily meetings with my managers. I had weekly meetings with the district managers. So there was an awful lot more management activity to make sure that the service was safe and that children were being supported as they needed to be. If we move on to the next slide, which is titled Data, and I think it speaks for itself. What we anticipated happening during the lockdown was that actually activity levels would reduce and then they would rise significantly after the restrictions ended. So in April, and indeed our activity did reduce. In May, it was back to normal levels, and in June, July, August, September, and through into October now, what we have seen is a sustained over and above 15% extra demand on children's social care. That has meant we've seen more children come into care, which actually members will know for the last 12 months prior to lockdown, the national rise was 4%, but Hampshire was bucking that trend. We had a 4% reduction in our children in care, which we think was a reflection of our Hampshire approach and the transformation work we've been doing. We've also seen an increase in the numbers of children subject to a child protection plan. Again, that's really for the first time in about 4 years. All of this is a result of the extra demand and the complexity of work that's come out post-lockdown. At the bottom of that slide, you can see that it talks about the number of visits undertaken in person. As of September, that was around 95, 96%. And I know that every child will have been seen through August and September on a face-to-face visit. That was something that we asked our staff to do. And of course, we have a churn for families and children that we're working with, so that was quite a lot of activity. And I know, I'll make no bones, some of my social workers are becoming anxious again as infection rates rise. They're saying, so how do I keep myself safe if I'm having to go and do a face-to-face visit? And it's absolutely the right question to ask. We have good stocks of PPE, we have some clear guidance to support them, and we will continue to adapt our guidance around visits as the pandemic moves into its next phase. And again, I'll perhaps come back to that, but I talk about next steps. The next slide talks about how we work with children and families, and I talked before, it's a range of technology has been used. That's not without its problems as people adapt to it, but for our children in particular, and particularly those older teenagers, they're well used to technology, and in fact most of them have engaged better as a result of using WhatsApp or Zoom or some other technology. It's us that's had to play catch up a bit there, but I think we're, as this meeting testifies, that we're all getting there. Next slide is around children in care, and our children in care were supported tremendously by foster carers, our residential staff and our social workers. One of the things social workers worked really hard at and are continuing to do is actually making sure that they stay engaged with the children, young people they're working with. So if they can't see them face to face, they're certainly staying in contact with them virtually. And I think that there was I've got some excellent examples of creative ways of engaging young people and helping them through what for some of them was an incredibly difficult time where they couldn't see wider family members, or there were restrictions around themselves because of their own health. The next slide talks to our foster carers and residential staff who have been, as it says on the slide, outstanding. As we move into the second phase of the pandemic, if we can call it that, we'll have to think about increasing the support to both those groups of staff, because they will need that, because we need them to maintain the care of our children. The Children and Families branch worked closely with Brian Pope's branch around education and inclusion to make sure that vulnerable children were able to access school during the lockdown period. And we've worked even harder to make sure that as the restrictions have eased, then we've got the rest of our children going back to school insofar as we possibly can. What we've also seen just recently is an increase in electively home educated children. So that's something else that Brian and I will need to think about, how we respond to that. It's perhaps an understandable reflection of lockdown, post-lockdown, and of what's, I understand, the second wave as it's been described. Next slide is around partners. I'll say what I've said before. Partnership working remains incredibly strong in Hampshire, and particularly with the police, it's enabled us to make sure that vulnerable children and families have been kept safe. Our staff on the next slide, they continue to work tirelessly, actually is the right word, tirelessly to ensure that they are responding to changes of guidance and regulation from central government, responding to the demands of children, some of whom don't want to socially distance, and the demands of the families whom they need to support. And they've continued to deliver a really excellent service. I'm going to jump the next slide around connectivity and go to what we've learnt. What we've learnt is that in the main we are adaptable as a service, that we can maintain children safely in their homes and in their community wherever possible through the use of virtual visits. Where we haven't been able to do that, then we've gone out and done face-to-face visits safely, and we will continue to do that. The technology works well. It does take time to get used to it, we know that. And I think the general adaptability of our staff, where that leaves me looking ahead through the autumn and winter, is if we need to take a step back, if there are greater restrictions, I'm confident we'll be able to respond to that. I think what didn't work so well, what hasn't worked so well, I think the equipment issue has been addressed. I think we're adapting to the sensitive HR meetings that was on this slide. I think we still need to better understand how you undertake assessments virtually if we get back to that position. And I also think that what we've learnt is how tough it is to support the well-being of our staff. That is, and everybody, it's not just staff and children and families. I think it's society as a whole has moments where people feel okay and I can manage this, and then other days we all feel, blimey, when is this going to end? It's no different for our social workers, other than perhaps they're seeing some unpleasant situations during the day on top of their own feelings. So what next? And I won't talk to the slides anymore. I'll just talk perhaps about what I see happening during the autumn and the winter. Our absence rates have remained really low. During April, we got up to 20% of my staff were absent. So I have around about 1,600 members of staff, and we were looking at around about 20%. Now, some of them were working but self-isolating. That's decreased over the summer and sits around 7% now. It's just started to pick up a little bit, as you would expect. And I'm also aware that some of the staff have their families, that there's an increase in bereavements. And so what we're seeing played out in terms of infection rates, you know, it's no different for my staff in Hampshire. What we have got is strong contingency plans to go back to our phase 1, and if necessary go to a phase 2, which would be bringing more staff in from non-critical services to make sure that services such as the MASH, Swanwick Lodge, our children's homes, our foster homes can continue to function as is, because they absolutely need to. I think the biggest challenge as I look ahead will be this issue of morale and how you keep people's morale up when there will be increased infection rates, increased staff absence, and that has to be said. Shorter days, darker nights, it all plays a part in how we support our staff, and I'm absolutely clear that we will continue to do so. Even if it does mean I have to take a video of myself wearing pyjamas yet again, if that boosts morale, then so be it. We're well placed, and I do believe that, having spoken to colleagues in other authorities, we are well placed, but we'll need to be responsive and adaptable. Thank you, Chairman.
There's a thought, you in your pyjamas. Right, have we got any questions at all? Councillor Porter.
Thank you. And I think what it has brought home to all of us is that every single employee is a person in their own right and their own challenges. And I think Stuart's sensitive point about at the end was well made. I'm just going to ask, this was written and we saw the presentation a few weeks ago, but obviously we're going now into September and October, and the the prospect now is not it's a 6 months, but it could be until next spring. And so on the what we've learned page, one of the things that we have noticed is that it's difficult to argue and challenge online, and you've raised it as the title sensitive meetings. But do you think that in the view of Hampshire always transitioning and always trying to do better, do you think that's a easier or more difficult process? And how easy is it, particularly for children in need or children in any of this scheme, how do you think how easy is it to see that whole child in relation to what you see on a screen and the effect of human contact, particularly if that child's, sometimes if a child is less able to communicate human to human, it's a sign of a lack of perhaps self-esteem or whatever. So how easy is it to maintain that relationship with the whole child? And just to say that we're very conscious about that, and with Domestic Violence Day in November, we're hoping, and I gather that Hampshire is also interested in signing up to the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse if they haven't done so already.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. I suppose in terms of professional challenge, that's a really interesting question, because in the meetings I've been in, I've been challenged, and I haven't seen a difference in response from my managers, district managers, team managers. If anything, I go to more meetings now because I can get to them more easily. And actually, and some of those meetings I don't have pre-established relationships, but I see confident, articulate professionals who are able to challenge, and I think that's important. When I meet frontline staff and frontline managers, they are incredibly confident people, and so actually they do challenge, and I'm confident that they would be like that with other professionals. So I don't think that's proving to be an issue. I think the next point you raised about the whole child and seeing that child within their environment and the context for that child, that is a challenge. You know, how do you know if you're doing a virtual visit? How do you know who else is in the room? Yes, you can say, can you please turn your phone round so I can see that you're on your own? But they may not be. We have to face that fact. And I think that's one of the reasons we've quickly got back to face-to-face visits wherever we can, just to reassure ourselves as professionals that what we thought we were seeing at one end of the phone was actually accurate. In most cases it was, in some cases it clearly won't be, where people want to avoid a difficult conversation. In the main, that's been a minority, but I can't pretend that it hasn't happened where there's been some of people avoiding the truth with social workers on virtual visits. The regulations were amended in May to allow virtual visits because technically beforehand you had to physically see a child. And I can remember being in some meetings where people have said, well, this is awful, children won't get seen. Yes, they do get seen, just because we do it virtually. The amendment, most of the amendments to the regulations have been removed, but that one I think sensibly stays to allow us the flexibility. In exceptional circumstances, I think is how it describes it in the amended regulations. I think a pandemic is probably an exceptional circumstance. So what I've said to people is, though, don't use it unless you feel you need to. You know, I have to trust their judgment, and they will only use it as and when they need to. And increasingly, I suspect if infection rates continue as they are, they might use it more. But we'll wait and see. As I said before, there's enough PPE. We can keep our staff safe if they do face-to-face visits. And in terms
they might be quite glad of the PPE on in normal times as well, I suspect.
Some of them certainly would be. In terms of Domestic Violence Day, I'm acutely aware that some of my staff won't be leaving home and will have their own circumstances to deal with. And we have to be really sensitive to that. I mean, I've asked my own managers, how are you managing it? Now, we just need to go that extra bit. And also, we think about it with our children, thinking the unthinkable. That's what we're trained as for social workers. That applies to our staff as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Stuart. I appreciate the hard work of your team.
Thank you, Stuart. If there's no more questions, then we'll come to the recommendation. and the recommendation is that the panel note the report. Could I have a verbal confirmation of that, please?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you very much for your presentation there, Stuart. Thank you. We come now to item 8. So that's the item we've just had, isn't it? Sorry, I beg your pardon. I've got it on 2 sheets here. Item 9 we come to, and this is Children's and Families Occupational Therapy Update. And for this, we're going to be given this by Andy Lund. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so this is the Children and Families Occupational Therapy Service for Hampshire. The service is currently in a good position overall, I think I would say. If you look at the executive summary, it's paragraph 3, page 53. We've had some significant staffing pressures, recruitment and retention issues throughout the last 18 months, 2 years, and beyond that even, I think, which has contributed significantly to the waiting lists going up to about 2 years as of March 2020. And also that's led to kind of an artificial underspend on budget. So the budget looks like it's very underspent, but that's an artificial position because we will catch up on that when we catch up with the work. So as of September 2020, the waiting list is down to 4 months from what was approaching 24 months. And that's due to a combination of additional temporary assistance that we've employed, plus a new establishment of dedicated permanent admin and a streamlining of processes via a lean review. So all of that has contributed to some significant improvements, I think, and doing away with the waiting list, working that waiting list through. But with a slight caveat, we are seeing an increase in referrals now since, in the last couple of months, since the end of the first wave, should we put it. Moving on to paragraph 5, page 54, the finance position. You can see there, as I just alluded to, the underspend that looks like an underspend. It is an underspend right now, but that will level out as the backlog works through the system and those assessments that have now been completed. The spend will come through. Moving on to section 11, page 56, recruitment and retention. I've already mentioned that those difficulties led to that long waiting list in the first place. These are issues that are shared with the adult service as well. There's a national shortage of OTs. There's competition from neighbouring local authorities, which you could say that's the same for every service, but we've got 2 in the north in particular, 2 neighbours that pay significantly more and attract more staff, unfortunately. Plus there's a perception that children's OT service is a lot more complex, and so is less appealing to those qualified OTs that are out there looking for work. Paragraph 13, the Hampshire equipment stores, page 56. We do contribute jointly to the running of the Hampshire equipment stores. We contribute by a cash contribution. It's run by adult services. So we at Children's Services and Health, we each put in 76k to the running costs and the maintenance costs of Hampshire equipment stores. There are some complicated processes in place there in terms of funding arrangements, and there's a joint commissioning group looking at how we can make some efficiencies there around those funding arrangements, possibly pooling budgets and linking in better with SEN and education. There's a working group in place for that now. Paragraph 14, page 57, the Better Care Fund. There remains, has always been, and there still is some disparity around the use of this across the districts still. We've learned to manage that and to work with that. And in terms of the Disabled Facilities Grant, there's been a recent court ruling which is probably going to be subject to appeal, but pending that appeal, there's potential savings to be made for Hampshire in terms of reduced top-ups being required for DFGs, for the Disabled Facilities Grants. I am just running through the headlines here, and I think that's just come to the conclusions. Oh, learning and development. I'm sorry. We are jointly with adults. We are looking at bringing in using the apprenticeship scheme to try and boost our recruitment and retention and the strand to the efforts of improving our recruitment and retention. So we're hoping to have our first apprentice in the next few weeks or couple of months, hopefully. So in conclusion then, the services continue to be affected by staffing issues. The weight to be allocated to a therapist has improved. The pandemic gave us an opportunity to catch up as well, I must say, because there was a drop off in referral numbers in the early days of the pandemic, and also the ability to do, or the necessity to do more virtual visits enabled our staff to catch up a bit, because obviously the need to travel was done away with. The main concern is around recruitment and retention, exacerbated by the lack of therapists in the country. Our senior management team have endorsed the service's intention to proceed together with Workforce Development on developing the apprenticeship scheme. And I think that's everything I wanted to highlight, so I welcome questions.
I have one for you, Andy. On item 14, there seems to be a dispute or a disagreement between Hampshire County Council and the districts. Is there a way of resolving that at all?
I'm not sure that there's a dispute. It's just that the districts
disagree.
They have the freedom to manage that fund in how they see fit. And they don't, so in our view, I mean, they will obviously all have their 11 different views, but in our view, they don't prioritise children's services. And you know, they employ their own housing OTs, and much of that Better Care Fund is funneled through their housing OTs, and as little of it comes our way. That's our view and our perspective. They'll each have their own, I'm sure. But we do have a quarterly meeting with all the districts that we keep making our case at and keep plugging away at trying to get more consistency in terms of how they're implemented in each of the districts.
Thank you. Councillor Porter.
Thank you. That was one of the questions I was going to ask, to be pleased it's cut down. One of the things I wanted to raise are EHCPs set in process by OTs ever?
No, I think the simple answer is no, they're not. But if an OT finds that there are issues, you know, the unmet needs in a home relating to a child, then they will make the relevant onward referrals to either to children's social care or SEN or education as appropriate. But they don't have a hand in themselves per se. Right.
Okay, thank you. And the second thing is, we often see children on television and people are raising huge amounts of money for them to have a new wheelchair, etc., etc. What are the innovations in equipment provision, and does Hampshire have any role in looking at that, or do we just purely procure what's on the market?
We procure what's on the market, but we do talk with, we have an agency called Argenti that we work closely with, and they provide technical solutions for a lot of our disabled children. So we have you know, they are linked in with our teams, our Argenti. So we are, you know, we work with them routinely. Okay. And they are involved in our resource allocation panels as well. So they will look at the referrals coming through the panel to see if there's any tech solutions that could help with those children. One, to meet need, and two, to reduce the cost of other possibly more expensive solutions that would be the alternative otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you. Yes, and first of all, you talked about the pay for occupational therapists. I mean, can we increase the pay? It's a very simple question, really, and so that we are actually on par with those other counties and boroughs. I know we don't have much spare cash, but it just seems to me if there was a shortage, it would be a good thing. And this, I was just interested in the sleep programme. How successful is that obviously parents might think that their child needs special equipment, but it may not be that's the issue. It might be something underlying, and sleep program can help. I'm just interested to hear a bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Stuart, did you want to field the first question, then I'll come back in?
I certainly will. My worry, if we increase pay, is that it's an arms race to the bottom, because if I raise the pay for Hampshire OTs, then a neighbouring authority will raise theirs still further. So I'm no better off at all in that sense. And I think we have to focus on some of the issues around OTs, so just a 9-day fortnight, making sure they get regular supervision, making sure they've got the right level of support and access to equipment and training. I think we have to focus on that, because the other way, I think, probably is bankruptcy for my branch. I just keep, because there's a number of authorities that will just keep upping and upping the salary, and that's yeah, road to ruin, unfortunately.
Okay.
Andy, can I come to you for sleep program? Sure. So yes, in terms of the sleeping program, the sleep clinic, we do commission that service, and we can refer families to that, and indeed we do. And the OT service have the ability to refer direct. That's quite a recent development, that our OTs can refer directly into that service now. And you're spot on. It does. There is, you know, that we do it in the hope that that will help achieve savings through other means, and quite often, you know, improving the child's sleep will have knock-on effects and prevent other costs in the future and in the present as well, of course. Sometimes we might need to pay for other provisions alongside until it starts taking effect.
Okay.
Councillor Wade, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's an interesting report, this. The question I'd like to ask, Andrew, is that up to 2020 you had a backlog, partly due to lack of staff, but an increase in referrals, which to a degree is reflected across the children's services service. Now, while in the pandemic, you rightly noted you're able to catch up because there's less referrals. But when we eventually come out of this, we will have, presumably, a trend of increase. We'll have a backlog, and we'll have an increased referrals as well. And taking into account you've still got staffing issues, have you got a sort of a plan to take us forward? Because this is a bit like a sleeping giant, maybe probably the wrong word really, but it's going to be a problem that will exist again, if not next spring, later on next year when we're out of it.
Yeah, sure. You know, I take your point completely, and it is something we're very conscious of, very aware of, and trying to avoid going back into that position of having a long waiting list. Yes, we have vacancies in the service, but you know, that aside, we've recruited the assistants. We've recruited 3 assistants for a period of 12 months. Now, if towards the end of that 12 months we've still not recruited to our vacancies, then I'll be asking to extend those assistants. We've also got some dedicated admin now, which we've never had before. We've had to kind of beg, borrow and steal from the district resources around the 8 districts. They've now got the service, the OTs have got their dedicated admin. That's helping hugely. So those 2 measures together are significant, I think. And add to that the lean work that we've done recently. We've very much trimmed down on the processes of the team, you know, streamlining and making efficiencies there. So all those things together and will hopefully prevent us getting back into that undesirable situation again.
I've got a question for you, Andy, and it is to do with staffing actually. Over something like a 10-year period, in fact 12 years, I've come across the service once or twice, and each time it's happened, there's been a problem with either delivery or collection of items supplied from the store. No question, no quibble about the quality of the items. It's been the quality of the delivery and the collection. Very often where equipment has been delivered or collected, which should have had a 2-man crew and has only had a 1-man crew. Now, I know this happened 12 years ago and it is still happening. Are you ever likely to rectify this problem?
I don't know a lot about those issues, I'm afraid, Councillor Keast. I haven't heard about those problems directly from our own service. As I say, it's run by adult services. We just pay a maintenance cost towards it in children's services. What I do know is that sometimes there's a difference of opinion about what's delivered and is that what was prescribed. There are lots of, as I described earlier, there's a lot of inefficiencies and there's a lot of complexities about the way it's run. And some of those do manifest in logistical issues like you just described. And there is the Joint Commissioning Group are looking at that, and there's a working group in place to look at streamlining all of that. So again, I can only say I don't recognise some of what you're saying, but there are measures in place to hopefully resolve that or at least improve it.
Okay. Are there any more questions at all? I see none. Right, we come through to the recommendation for this particular item, and that is again to seek verbal agreement that members have noted the report. Could I have a verbal response, please?
Noted. Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time and presentation, Andy. Members, that is the end of the meeting, and the webcast will now end. Thank you.